The third condition was emotional immaturity and narcissism. Now, I put these two together because it can be really helpful to think about both of them existing along the same spectrum, with emotional immaturity at one end, increasing in severity up to narcissism. One of the core features that runs through both of these is lack of empathy. These are mothers who struggle to be empathic. They struggle to take someone else's perspective. And because of that, this can make it incredibly difficult, near impossible for them to validate your emotions as their child. And often what happens is that our inner experience is not only neglected, it's also incredibly invalidated. We might receive a lot of criticism, shame, punishment, whether physical or emotional. And this, of course, can lead us to suppress our feelings and adapt our behavior really to prevent overwhelming our mother. And one of the consequences of that lack of empathy, where we don't receive that validation or we get complete neglect for our inner experience, is that tends to be the birthplace for losing self-trust. Because the way that self-trust is built is somewhat naming, validating, and mirroring what your inner experience is. And when that happens for us, what that tells us not just emotionally, psychologically, but in our nervous system, is that your reality is valid. You can trust what you're feeling, what you're experiencing and perceiving. And that lack of self-trust is really important, particularly when we get to talking about long-term impact. But it makes it that much easier for us in adulthood to sort of become this chameleon and make decisions based on what other people want or need versus what feels right for us, because we are so ungrounded in ourselves, in our self-trust, because of that lack of them. Now, another core feature that runs between the two of those is also having a mother who has difficulty regulating her emotions. This could be a mother who reacts explosively, sometimes seemingly to unpredictable stimuli, but oftentimes it's in response to you as a child having a need or having an emotion. So these are mothers who might lash out in rage and anger. They also might be mothers that completely give you the cold shoulder or use the silent treatment. These are mothers that often take a child's voice, a difference of opinion, or a boundary as a personal attack. And the combination of that dysregulation and the instability that can create in your home growing up, as well as the threat of disconnection, really primes us to be extra hypervigilant to the moods, emotions, body language of our mother, so that we can really modify our behavior to prevent triggering her. Now, somewhat related is the fourth one, which is abandonment. It's important to remember when we talk about abandonment that it can absolutely mean a physical abandonment, being left, but more often than not, for most of us who struggle with abandonment, it's actually emotional abandonment. And what that can look like is if you didn't meet expectations, you pushed back, said no, didn't follow through with a request, held a boundary. Your mother may have threatened or actually abandoned you, either physically, right, maybe leaving, as well as being left emotionally. Now, what that can sound like is, I'm going to leave if you don't stop crying. I'm not talking to you, or even icing you out until you come back and apologize. If there was any rupture between you and your mother, it's not uncommon that you may have been sent away alone. And what this does is it leaves you as the child totally flooded with emotions, particularly shame. And experiencing that kind of shame without any repair leaves you as a child sitting in that. And when that happens repeatedly, it starts to become kind of fused with your identity, where you really start to believe that I am bad or I am wrong, right? As children, we don't really have the same capacity that we do in adulthood to see the big picture, to see that, hey, my parent reacted to that unfavorably because, they had a stressful day at work or because they have unresolved trauma. What we experience is their behavior is a reflection of me. And more than that, when we're very young, it is extremely threatening and overwhelming to us to view our parent as flawed in any way. And it is so much more adaptable for us to view ourselves as bad. So naturally, if we've experienced any kind of that abandonment or threat of abandonment, it makes perfect sense that we might flex and bend in all sorts of ways in order to prevent that from happening. Another common dynamic that can show up particularly with narcissistic parents, but is certainly not exclusive to them, is envy and retaliation. If your mother needed to be the best, if she needed to be the center of attention, then often you having any sort of success, sometimes even just happiness, might provoke envy, retaliation, even manipulation. And this can be really confusing because you might have also experienced your mother playing up your achievements, often in times where it served her. When we are a threat to our parent in that way, we learn very quickly not to take up too much space. We learn how to stay small, how to stay safe, and make sure that our mother is comfortable and happy. So as I'm talking about some of these dynamics and starting to highlight how they can influence us, it's really important for us to ground back to the fact that all these adapting behaviors are in service of survival. This is what developed in childhood to keep us close and connected, even if it came at the cost of ourselves. I know it's so easy in adulthood to point to some of these qualities and see how they're problematic for us or how they're keeping us stuck in certain patterns or behaviors or relationships. But at the end of the day, what's here now is something that served you extremely well growing up with your mother. Now, as a reminder, we have our fight, flight, freeze response, and we have a fawn response. This is our fourth response. And many of us who experience these kinds of dynamics with our mothers tend to favor a fawn response. This is a really interesting response because it's a blended state where we're both monitoring what's going on around us, but we're also incredibly disconnected from ourselves.